Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, New East Western, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, Crossing New Frontiers to Conquer Today's Challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, New East Western.
My experimental discovery was that a massively parallel supercomputer can solve 65,536 initial boundary value problems of modern mathematics and computational physics, and solve all those problems at the same time instead of solving them one problem at a time. That experimental discovery occurred at 10:15 a.m. New York time, Tuesday the 4th of July of 1989. That experimental discovery made the news headlines in 1989 because it was the first successful noteworthy calculation to be executed across an ensemble of 65,536 processors and executed in a manner that demonstrated that massively parallel processing is not a huge waste of time. In other words, I experimentally discovered that the fastest speeds in supercomputing can only occur when and where the calculations are evenly distributed across the most number of processors that will also be executing the same number of computational physics codes. In 1989, the available technology limited my parallel processing experiments to across an ensemble of 64 binary thousand processors. However, I proved theoretically that extreme scale computational physics codes could be executed 64 binary billion times faster and executed across an ensemble of 64 binary billion processors. That experimental discovery of how massively parallel processing works cannot be fully explained as sound bites on television. That experimental discovery of a new supercomputer that encircled a globe and encircled it in the manner the internet encircled a globe cannot be completely described in a 140-character tweet. Nor can it be described in an 18-minute TED Talk. Nor can I fully explain in a 90-minute lecture my massively parallel processing supercomputing discovery. Since the early 1980s, I explained my experimental discoveries to research supercomputer scientists, and I explained them in a series of research seminar lectures that I gave across the United States. Some of my massively parallel processing supercomputer lectures are posted on my website, Emeagwali.com. This lecture is only one part from my 1001 research notes and lecture transcripts that I posted at Emeagwali.com. It was for a good reason that I was the lone wolf researcher that was at the farthest frontier of the most massively parallel processing supercomputer ever built. The reason was that it was impossible to understand the massively parallel processing supercomputer and to understand it in less than 16 years of full-time training across the disciplines of mathematics, physics, and supercomputing. It will be impossible for you to understand my experimental discovery of how and why massively parallel processing makes computers faster and how and why the technology makes supercomputers fastest. It will be impossible for you to understand massively parallel processing supercomputers and to understand supercomputers without also experimenting and programming supercomputers. For me, Philip Emeagwali, I understood supercomputers after I had programmed supercomputers for the 16 years onward of June 20, 1974. I programmed 16 supercomputers in those 16 years, and I programmed those supercomputers as a lone wolf programmer. Along your way to the farthest frontier of supercomputing, you will also spend the budget of a small nation and spend it to purchase the fastest supercomputer in the world that you must program to perhaps experimentally discover the fastest computation and discover it with a paradigm shift that was previously considered impossible. It took me 16 years, onward of June 20, 1974, to understand and to experimentally discover how and why parallel processing makes supercomputers faster. Therefore, it will be impossible for you to understand in 60 minutes the technology of parallel processing that took me 16 years to understand and took me 60 years to articulate in this lecture of today. My experimental discovery of massively parallel processing is not similar to seeing a painting. To deeply understand the most massively parallel processing supercomputer that costs the budget of a small nation is not similar to reading a novel that costs $10. The difference between a painting and a novel and the new internet that I invented is that you can get the big picture of a painting in 1 minute, get the big story of a novel in 1 day, but you cannot completely understand how a grand challenge technological problem such as traveling to the moon was solved and understood, and understand that lunar exploration in one lifetime. You cannot completely understand how to travel to the moon and go to the moon alone and understand it in a century. I don't want this lecture series to be as detailed and as abstract as the series of lectures of massively parallel processing supercomputing that I gave in the early 1990s and gave to supercomputer scientists. In the early 1990s, I was appointed as the distinguished speaker of the Association for Computing Machinery. In the early 1990s, I was appointed as the distinguished visitor of the Computer Society of the IEEE, the acronym for the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. The IEEE is the largest technical society in the world. I lectured in American universities for the IEEE, and I lectured on massively parallel processing, supercomputing. I was appointed for a supercomputer lecture tour and as a distinguished speaker of the Association for Computing Machinery. That association was the premier society for computer professionals. I lectured on how and why extreme scale problems in algebra could be solved across a new internet that was defined and outlined by an ensemble of 64 binary thousand commodity off-the-shelf processors that were identical to each other and that were equal distances afar and apart from each other. I don't want this lecture series to be too abstract for non-mathematicians watching it online. For that reason, I described the partial differential equations that I invented in prose rather than in partial derivatives. Nor do I want my lectures to sound like lectures on how to solve the quadratic equation of algebra and how to solve the partial differential equations of calculus. In my 1980s research lectures, I emphasized my theoretical process over my experimental discovery of how to compute faster and emphasized my research over my invention and over my constructive reduction to practice that reduced my global network of 65,536 processors to my small copy of the internet. Yet, in another sense, my lectures were calculus lessons that were beyond calculus lessons. They were the culmination of my 16-year-long mathematical quest for how to solve the partial differential equations of my new calculus that encoded the laws of motion of physics. The calculus not known was how to derive on the blackboard closed-form solutions to those systems of coupled, nonlinear, and time-dependent partial differential equations. The calculus known was how to derive on a single motherboard the numerical solutions to the algebraic partial difference approximations of those systems of coupled, nonlinear, and time-dependent partial differential equations. The calculus known was how to solve those partial differential equations on the motherboard, but solve them with infinite time to solution. The calculus not known was how to solve those partial differential and difference equations and solve them across my new internet. I visualized that new internet as a global network of 65,536 commodity processors, or as a global network of as many identical computers. I tried to keep the contents of my lectures straightforward. I gave videotaped lectures on what I discovered and invented. I explained my visions, my struggles, and my eureka moments. My scientific lectures differ from daily classroom teachings of a body of scientific knowledge that was discovered over the past 5 millennia of recorded history that dates to the era of the pyramids in Africa. I want you to experience my scientific lectures in a manner that is both visceral and larger than life.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.